Ravens rookies report to training camp today, but there's no team practice until next Wednesday, so we're still about a week away. So I figured it was a good time to do some way too early roster predictions and depth chart predictions. I'm going to predict who makes the 53-man roster ahead of training camp, and then we'll revisit this towards the end of training camp when they're actually cutting down the roster. I'll do a final roster prediction video, but I thought it would be fun to do one ahead of training camp. Obviously, we could sign somebody and, a couple of these positions could change. There could be a couple injuries or whatever. That's why this is a way too early roster prediction video, but it doesn't hurt to go over where we're at and the depth chart currently as it stands. So let's dive into the quarterbacks, which I think are pretty obvious. We got Lamar Jackson, Cooper Rush, and then Devin Leary is going to be the emergency third quarterback, so he won't count against the game day roster. I think he does have to count against the 53 though, but I have him on this as that emergency quarterback slot. The main starting active quarterbacks will be Lamar Jackson and Cooper Rush. And then looking at the running backs, I went with Derrick Henry, Justice Hill, Keaton Mitchell, and then I don't have Rasheen Ali on the active 53. I would not be surprised if he finds a way to make the team, if he's there as a kick returner or playing a lot of meaningful special teams minutes, then I could see him making this roster. It definitely would not shock me. But for this prediction video, I did not go with Rasheen Ali on the active 53. There's definitely going to be some players we have to sacrifice. I know it's early in looking at this, but as you do this entire 53-man roster, there's just not enough room to keep everyone. Some guys are going to have to go to the practice squad, which is obviously always a risk that they get picked up. I think Rasheen Ali is on that borderline, and I just didn't have him making the active roster in this video. Fullback's pretty straightforward. We're obviously going with Patrick Ricard. I don't think any other fullback makes this roster. Heading over to the wide receivers, we got Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, DeAndre Hopkins, Tez Walker, Tylan Wallace, and LeJontay Wester. This one's also pretty straightforward. I mean, there's guys like Anthony Miller, Dayton Wade that are right there on the borderline. I think that they are probably headed to the practice squad again. I mean, we could carry 7 wide receivers if somebody really has a special teams role, but I don't see that happening, to be honest. I think we're going with 6, and I think LeJontay Wester is that last slot, mainly because he's going to be our starting punt returner, but he could also provide some offensive snaps as well. But these are my 6 wide receivers in order. Moving over to tight ends, I went with Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Charlie Kohler. I think these 3 are pretty much locks to be on the 53, and I don't think there's a lot of competition pushing them. I really think that these 3 are pretty cemented into the 53 as the only tight ends that will be active. The depth chart, I went with Mark Andrews ahead of Isaiah Likely, but they're both going to play a ton. I wouldn't be surprised if Isaiah Likely, as the year goes, does play a little bit more. I'm hoping he gets extended soon. This is probably Mark Andrews' last year in a Ravens uniform. We'll see how next offseason shakes out. That's too early to tell, really, but I think we're probably going to likely not pay Andrews, but I still think Andrews has a huge role for the Ravens this year and will probably be ahead of Isaiah Likely by a little bit on the depth chart, but they're both going to be out there making a lot of plays. Heading to the offensive line at left tackle, I got Ronnie Stanley and Joseph Noteboom. They could play Carson Vincent at left tackle. I know he is a developmental tackle. I'm not sure exactly where he's going to be slotted in. I have him slotted in at right tackle right now just to cleanly fill out this depth chart, but he's a swing tackle and so is Joseph Noteboom, so they really could be rotated anywhere. But at left tackle, I do have Ronnie Stanley, Joseph Noteboom making it. I think they are locks. At left guard, I went with Andrew Voorhees and Ben Cleveland. I think they both make the roster. I do have Andrew Voorhees starting over Ben Cleveland right now. At center, we got Tyler Linderbaum. He's locked into the starting role. Behind him is a question mark. I'm not sure if Nick Samak will make the active 53. I do have him on here, but he's one of those borderline guys that they could just add to another position group and go with one less center. We know Ben Cleveland has taken some center snaps, so I think Nick Samak is a true debate and question mark, but for now, I did put him on here. And then at right guard, we got Daniel Fa'alele and Emory Jones Jr. Emory Jones Jr. is another versatile lineman who could be put at right tackle on the depth chart or wherever they really want to put him, but I think that he will end up playing right guard, to be honest with you. So we'll see how that shakes out. I have him there as the backup right guard right now. We haven't seen him yet. He's been dealing with that labrum injury. And Daniel Fa'alele seems pretty locked in to start. So I have him starting at right guard. At right tackle, I went with Roger Rosengarten and Carson Vincent. Now, I don't know if they're going to have Carson Vincent at right tackle. Like I said, he's a developmental swing tackle. So, take the depth chart position group labels for what it is. I think a lot of these linemen are very versatile and can be moved around. I don't see him going to the practice squad because I really think that they would probably lose him. So I do have Vincent making the active roster. I think you have to keep some of these younger linemen, even though they're developmental. I think you have to make them active on the roster or they're probably going to get plucked off the practice squad, and then what was the point of drafting him? So I do think he makes the roster. I don't know exactly where he'll be, but that rounds out the starting offense. I think it's pretty straightforward. There's definitely some debate whether a guy like Nick Samak might make the active roster. Does Rasheen Ali make it? Do the Ravens go with a different wide receiver for some reason? There's some small question marks there, but overall, I think pretty much most of the starters are locked in unless we add a veteran. Obviously, if we go sign another veteran, then this could change. That's why this is way too early. But this is where I think we stand right now. And if I had to make my final predictions, this is where I'd be at right now from an active 53 and a depth chart perspective on offense. Heading over to the defense, we'll start with the defensive line. At left defensive end, we got Nnamdi Madubuike and Aeneas Peebles. And then at right end, we got Broderick Washington. At nose tackle, we got Travis Jones and John Jenkins. There's really not a ton of competition behind these guys. I think all 5 of these guys are locked in on the defensive line. And maybe a guy like CJ Ravenel or something could make a case. You never know. Jason Jones or somebody could end up really stepping up and maybe pushing the veteran or something. But I think this is also pretty straightforward. I think this is locked in. There's just not a ton of guys behind them that are really in a position to make the active 53. Moving on to the linebackers. At left outside linebacker, I went with Kyle Van Noy, Tavius Robinson, and David Ajabo making it. Right outside linebacker, we got Adafe Owe, Mike Green, and Adisa Isaac. So I do have David Ajabo and Adisa Isaac making the active 53. I think those are the ones that people would debate. I heard a lot of people saying that Ajabo is going to get cut and whatnot, and we'll see. Like I said, there's still some time left. This is too early, but right now I do have all 6 of these guys being on the active 53. I don't think that we cut David Ajabo. Not right now. If we go sign a Jadeveon Clowney or a Von Miller or bring in a vet like that, then yes, I think David Ajabo could be on the chopping block. But for now, as it stands with this current roster, I do have them all making it. And then at inside linebacker, I got Roquan Smith, Trenton Simpson, Teddy Buchanan, and Jake Hummel. That's also how I have the depth chart. I got Roquan Smith and Trenton Simpson starting, and then Teddy Buchanan kind of being a rotational linebacker that's going to get some minutes this year, and I think could definitely have a nice future with the Ravens too, but he's going to play a lot of special teams. He's going to be in a little bit of a rotation, and we'll see how Trenton Simpson does, but I do think this is his job to lose. I do think Trenton Simpson starts, and then Jake Hummel is definitely going to be that special teams ace slash depth linebacker. I do think Teddy Buchanan probably plays a little bit more on defense than Jake Hummel, but I think Jake Hummel's not brought in for that. He's brought in to be a special teams ace. Moving on to corner, I got Nate Wiggins, Jair Alexander as the starting outside corners, and then I think behind them is Awuzie, TJ Tampa. Marlon Humphrey obviously will be a nickel corner or play in the slot. And then the last corner that I have making the roster is Bilal Kone. That means that Roger Longerbeam would be on the practice squad, and it also means that Jalen Armour-Davis would be cut. Now, this is definitely up for debate. This was one of the hardest position groups to predict as the final active 53. I think we're stacked here now. I think the top end of the corners is very obvious and very strong, but that depth is questionable. I think TJ Tampa definitely makes the roster. Awuzie is definitely going to make the roster. But out of the 6 round corners that we drafted this year, Longerbeam and Kone and Jalen Armour-Davis, there's just not enough room for all those guys to make it. I went with 6 right now. I guess they could push it to 7, but regardless, somebody's the odd man out. I don't think Jalen Armour-Davis would probably stick on the practice squad. Longerbeam might stick on the practice squad, and they could reverse those too. Maybe Longerbeam has an insane training camp in preseason and beats out Kone, and then Kone's that practice squad option. I'm not sure. I went with Kone right now, but this is definitely up for debate. I think this is one of the toughest position groups to predict fully. And then moving on to safety, which I think is one of the easier position groups to predict right now, and that is free safety is going to be Malachi Starks, Bo Braid as depth, and then strong safety Kyle Hamilton with Sanusi Kane behind him. I think Sanusi Kane's in the lead to be in that third safety role right now, but we'll see how it shakes out. We'll see if they add a veteran like a Justin Simmons or somebody that's still out there. But as of now, I think this is definitely what our safety room looks like. And then moving on to special teams, I got Tyler Loop as the starting kicker, Jordan Stout as the starting punter, Nick Moore as the starting long snapper, and then LaJohntay Wester at punt returner, Keaton Mitchell at kick returner, and we'll probably have another kick returner as well. I don't know if it'll be Tylan Wallace or end up being a Rasheen Ali, or LaJohntay Wester might do some kick returns, but I know for sure that Keaton Mitchell's doing kick returns. He's already talked about how he wants to be a Devin Hester for the Ravens, and we know that LaJohntay Wester was brought in to be the starting punt returner, so I think those are pretty locked in. And that rounds out the way too early 53-man roster predictions and depth chart predictions ahead of training camp. Things are obviously going to be fluid. I will do a final roster prediction video right before the actual roster gets cut down, but I thought it was kind of fun to look at where we're at right now ahead of training camp. There's definitely some position groups that are up for debate. I think corner is a huge one. Who's going to end up being that 6th, 7th corner? I don't even know how many we're going to keep, probably 6. Who's going to end up being that 6th corner? Who gets pushed to the practice squad or released? Do we keep all 6 outside linebackers? Does David Ajabo make the roster? Do we keep a backup center and Nick Samak? I think these are decisions that they're going to have to make. Does Rasheen Ali, get that 4th running back spot? Does he end up making the 53? There's some question marks that are still out there. The majority of this roster, though, is pretty intact. And I've said this before, but I truly believe that this is the hardest year ever to make the Ravens roster. The Ravens roster is insanely stacked, and it is not going to be easy for those depth guys fighting for a chance to get on to the active 53. Now, the practice squad is going to be filled out as well. A lot of the guys that are on the borderline end up going to the practice squad, so it's not like we're going to completely lose a lot of these guys, but regardless, they can't all make the 53. We just had a huge draft class, and they're not all going to make the active 53. Some of those late picks, like those corners, Longerbeam, Kone, Garrett Dellinger on the offensive line, like somebody's got to be the odd man out. They're not all making the active 53. So we'll end up seeing how it plays out. But let me know what you guys would change about this 53-man roster. Who would you take out to add if you want a different guy added? Because you can't just add a guy. You're going to have to say who you're going to cut instead. It's not easy, man. This is definitely one of the hardest 53-man rosters to put together. I think there's a lot of obvious positions, but then there's just a lot of positions you have no idea how it's going to play out right now. So it was fun to do. And I'm looking forward to training camp. Like I said, the rookies are reporting today, but the first team practice is next Wednesday. So we're still about 8 days away from that. And I can't wait, man. Football is right around the corner. Appreciate you guys, as always, for tuning in to another episode of the Flock Rundown. Have a beautiful rest of your day. And I'll let the greatest linebacker in the history of the game take us out.
Ravens Flock. The Flock Rundown is the place to be. My man Ryan has been a lifelong Ravens fan since he was born. The Flock Rundown. Nothing gets better than waking up and wondering how high we can fly. Tune in.
Motionless brainwaves attempt to swim their way to sense, can't tame the untamed.